Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. This is Beyond Wilders 1. Time now for Pulse. I'm Eric Njoka. This is what is happening today. Suicide bombers drive two explosive-laden cars into army compound in northwestern Pakistan. 12, including 6 civilians, killed after multiple militants attempted to storm the compound. President Donald Trump says that all federal funding will stop for colleges and schools that allow illegal protests and that agitators will be imprisoned or sent back to the country they came from. Palestinian President Abbas says he's ready to hold elections within a year and welcomes an Egyptian plan to rebuild the Gaza Strip. IDF claims it killed Issa Saadi, the Jenin head of the Hamas, on Monday night. Adds that border police, together with IDF soldiers from the Menashe Brigade, had intended to arrest the Hamas leader, who was killed in an exchange of fire. Mounting trade wars between Washington and its largest economic partners deepen as huge U.S. tariffs on Canada and Mexico kick in, sparking swift retaliation from Mexico City and Ottawa. At least 3 lawmakers were injured, one of them seriously, after chaotic scenes in Zambia's parliament, during which smoke bombs and flares were thrown as opposition parties insisted the session was illegal.
The dry season has started in the Philippines, with temperatures soaring in the capital and surrounding areas. A National Weather Service advisory warned the heat index measure of air temperature and relative humidity was set to reach danger levels in Manila and 2 other areas of the country. Now, as temperatures soared on Monday, local governments in Manila and 6 other districts ordered classrooms closed as a precaution. The capital region has a student population of more than 2.8 million, according to Education Department data. Due to protocols adopted during last year's heat wave, school superintendents recommended suspending in-person classes. Schools have been instructed to shift to alternative learning models, including online classes. The advisory asked residents in affected areas to avoid prolonged exposure to the sun. A heat wave struck large areas of the Philippines in April and May last year, leading to almost daily suspensions of in-person classes, affecting millions of students. Manila's temperature hit a record 38.8 degrees Celsius on April 27th last year. In January, UN Children's Agency UNICEF said extreme weather disrupted the schooling of about 242 million children in 85 countries last year, including the Philippines, with heat waves having the biggest impact. Global average temperatures hit record highs in 2024 and even briefly surpassed the critical 1.5 degrees Celsius warming threshold.
On to Japan now, which has been battling its biggest wildfire in over 3 decades. The blaze has spread through 2,100 hectares of land, damaged dozens of homes, and forced more than 1,000 to flee. Meanwhile, authorities warn that the fire could spread even further. Our next report telling you more.
Japan is fighting one of its biggest battles against wildfires. Aerial images show the vast scale of devastation, with heavy smoke rising and fires blazing at night near the northeastern city of Funatu. Over 2,000 troops and firefighters are combating an extensive forest fire. They're working day and night to contain the blaze, which first broke out in late February. Weather officials say an unusually dry winter and strong winds may be the reason behind the fires intensifying. This week, as the fire spread further, residents were forced to take refuge in school gymnasiums and other shelters.
Some students are very discouraged and heartbroken. One showed me a picture of their house burning down and said to me, "There's nothing left." Another said, "Even if I get into a high school, I don't know where I could stay for that."
This is Japan's biggest forest fire since the late 1980s, and the magnitude of it is greater than can be imagined. The northeastern Japanese city of Ofunato, located 500 kilometers north of Tokyo, has been the worst hit in this fire, with the area receiving less rainfall than any February in more than 20 years. In the wake of this blaze, Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has vowed to deploy more resources to limit the damage and safeguard public homes and properties. But Japan is not really unfamiliar with forest fires. The number of wildfires in Japan has declined since their peak in the 1970s. In 2023, about 1,300 fires broke out across the country between February and April as winds picked up. And this time around, the scale of the disaster is much higher, which needs more aid and relief to help people cope. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Far from defeated, measles is back on the public health radar this morning. There are now more than 160 measles cases in 10 states, with Kentucky and Washington reporting their first patients. But Texas has seen by far the most infections, 146 statewide, and the death of a 6-year-old child. San Antonio officials warning hundreds, if not thousands of people may have been exposed by a recent infected visitor.
I want to take this podium to send a plea out and urge the community. We say this in every phone call we get. If you are sick, please stay home. Don't go to the movie theater. Don't go to, large restaurants.
How infectious is measles?
Measles is the most infectious virus that we know of right now.
Dr. Ronald Cook oversees public health in Lubbock, Texas, a city where 20-plus children are currently hospitalized.
That's a significant number. You know, we consider children and young adolescents, young teenagers to be our healthy patient population.
One mom in Lubbock who grew up in a developing country telling us why she's rushing to get her daughter vaccinated.
I got measles as a kid because there was no vaccine. But here in America, basically it's free and accessible, and yet people choose to, ignore it.
The CDC just issuing its first advisory since the outbreaks began in early February, including this reminder: vaccinations remain the best defense against measles infection. Dr. Caitlin Baston is New Jersey's health commissioner, another state that's seen an outbreak.
It's critical to me that families can trust the information they're getting from health professionals. So I will tell you, again, vaccines are safe and effective. This is not up for debate.
For Saturday Today, Sam Brock, NBC News.
Our next story is about something that could affect over half of the adults worldwide. Over half of the adults across the world. According to a new study, rates of obesity and overweight are soaring to the extent that more than half of adults and almost a third of children and young people are set to be affected by 2050. Can you imagine that? That's the gravity of the crisis that we are dealing with. Just to lay this down in terms of numbers, according to research published in The Lancet, this basically represents more than 3.8 billion adults and 746 million children and adolescents. The team used data from 204 countries and territories to come up with their estimates and basically project what could happen in the future without action. What could happen in the future without action. And according to them, the rates of overweight and obesity have already more than doubled over the past 3 decades, with more than 2.1 billion adults and 493 million young people between the ages of 5 to 24 years affected as of 2021. Those are staggering numbers. In fact, with the Lancet study predicting that nearly a third of India's projected population will be overweight or obese by 2050. As you may be aware, obesity is associated with an increased risk of serious health problems like diabetes, some cancers, heart disease as well. It's been called a global epidemic of overweight and obesity. Also, a monumental social failure. But how exactly can one course correct? According to researchers, governments should use the estimates to focus on how to help populations most at risk, particularly around improving access to healthy diets and looking at the severity of the crisis. Experts have gone to the extent of suggesting that obesity must be officially recognized as a major non-communicable disease. Now, going back to the study we just told you about, it does have limitations reportedly, including data gaps and the use of body mass index as a marker. Not just that, it did not take into account the potential impact of obesity drugs, which have seen a huge demand in richer countries where they are available. And we have been telling you about this. So while the picture looks different in different parts of the world, researchers have said an accelerated rise in obesity among young people and the rise in low and middle income countries where health systems cannot cope with the coming disease burden were particularly worrying. In fact, what's also concerning here is that a separate study has raised the issue. It's called the World Obesity Atlas from the World Obesity Federation. According to the president of the federation, the most affected regions are developing countries. The fact of the matter is, this is one of the biggest public health challenges at this point across the world. The question still remains, are we really doing enough to tackle this?
A teenage boy has been shot dead in South London and a murder investigation launched. Reports of a shooting outside a playground on Paradise Road near to Stockwell Tube Station were made just after 3:20 p.m. Met Police officers, along with London's Air Ambulance and London Ambulance Service, rushed to the scene to find the 16-year-old victim. Despite the best efforts of paramedics, the teen was tragically pronounced dead when they arrived. Officers are still working to identify the teenager and contact his family. Lead officer on the case, Superintendent Gabriel Cameron, described the attack as enormously shocking. He said, "This is an enormously shocking incident which I imagine will cause huge distress to the local community. Our thoughts are with the young boy's family at this devastating time." Local officers are on the scene, gathering CCTV and speaking to witnesses to piece together what has happened. They will be supported by specialist homicide investigators shortly. Please rest assured we will work around the clock to identify and find those responsible. No arrests have been made yet, with a manhunt for the teen's killer still underway. Police cordons remain in place while emergency services carry out their investigations.
The harrowing final moments of a BBC star's family have been revealed in court after they were murdered by a crossbow killer. Desperate screams were heard as Kyle Clifford carried out extreme acts of violence against his ex Louise Hunt, 25, her mum Carol, 61, and sister Hannah, 28. The 26-year-old has pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder, a charge of false imprisonment, and 2 counts of possession of offensive weapons. But Clifford, who is not attending the trial, has denied raping Louise on July 9th, the same day the family was slaughtered at their home in Bushey, Hertfordshire. Cambridge Crown Court was told the killer had tricked his way into the home after claiming to Carol that he wanted to give Louise her belongings back following their breakup. At around 2:40 p.m, screams and banging sounds were heard as Carol, who was married to BBC racing commentator John, was brutally attacked 5 times with a knife, the court was told. Jurors heard Clifford then move the mum's body to a snug room and use various blankets to cover her up. Louise then entered the home through the back door at 4:12 p.m. after working her dog grooming business in the garden. Prosecutor Alison Morgan Casey said a minute later a faint scream/shout was heard coming from the home. This was followed by a high-pitched scream at 4:26 and then banging noises as Louise was restrained using tape as she was silenced and left unable to fight back, she added. Ms Morgan said the prosecution alleges that the defendant raped Louise Hunt at some point during this period and whilst she was being restrained by him. It's not possible to say where the restraint and rape took place within the property, save that Louise must have been in the snug somewhere Carol's body was located, facing away from the defendant at the time that she was murdered with the crossbow. The court heard Louise was restrained and gagged for more than 2 hours, during which time Clifford messaged her dad from her phone, asking when he was going to be home. He also searched about smoke alarms on Louise's phone in what the prosecution said, along with 2 empty petrol cans in the boot of his car, suggested he contemplated burning evidence. At 6:50 p.m, a loud whooshing sound was heard, which was the sound of the crossbow being fired to kill Louise Hunt, Ms Morgan said. Tragically, at the same time, Hannah arrived back at home and asked her mum, "You don't know how to use your phone," unaware both Carol and Louise had been murdered. She then realised Clifford was inside the home and asked him, "Kyle, I swear to God, what the Kyle, I swear to God." The court heard Hannah was then heard screaming, "Oh my God," before yelling, "What the is wrong with you? What is wrong with you?" At 6:52 p.m, she bravely managed to message her partner to tell him to call the police as Clifford was there and tying us up, jurors were told. 2 minutes later, another whoosh was heard, which jurors were told is believed to have been Clifford firing the crossbow at Hannah. As he fled the home armed with the weapon, she was heard to utter, "Mum, Louise," before screaming, "Oh my God, no." Hannah called 999 at 6:57 p.m, despite her horror injuries, to tell officers that Clifford had attacked her, Louise and Carol. When police arrived, they discovered Hannah collapsed in the doorway and Louise's body bound in the snug next to her mum's body. Jurors heard Clifford and Louise had been in a relationship, but she'd broke up with him in June 2024 due to his nasty temper. He'd also had secret relationships with 2 other women behind Louise's back, including one still ongoing at the time of the horror the court heard. In the days that follow, the killer bombarded her with messages that were rebuffed by his ex, jurors were told. As his resentment grew towards Louise and her family, who had advised her to end the relationship, he hatched the carefully planned and executed plot, the court heard. The court heard Clifford spend £357 on a crossbow and 6 bolts, and £89 on a high-level butchering knife from Amazon, it was said. The security worker also wrote a note to his family saying he did not want to live without her, and went to Toolstation to buy rope and to B&Q for duct tape in order to restrain Louise. Jurors heard on the night before the attack, Clifford searched for a video of Wandsworth prisoner officer Linda de Souza Abreu having sex with an inmate on a porn website. He even allegedly searched online to see what racing events were on to ensure John was out of the house, and then used deceit on Carol to gain access to the family home. The prosecutor said it is not in dispute that Clifford murdered Carol and her daughters, or that he was in possession of a knife and a crossbow. She added that the killer accepts that he falsely imprisoned Louise Hunt during the course of the incident, restraining her against her will. Ms Morgan told jurors the only count they must come to a verdict on is the rape charge against Louise. She continued, during the course of this prolonged incident, the prosecution alleges the defendant raped Louise Hunt. It was a violent sexual act of spite before he then killed her. You will have to determine that allegation against him. Clifford denies 1 count of rape, and the trial continues.
AI is transforming various industries around the world, and now it has entered the classroom as well. From virtual assistants to chatbots, AI is transforming the education sector, and how? China is investing heavily in AI technology, and not just in gadgets and software, but also in the education sector. AI technology is becoming increasingly prevalent in classrooms across China. Take a look at this report to find out more.
In 2024, China's Ministry of Education issued a major policy promoting AI education in primary and secondary school classrooms. The goal is to achieve full coverage of AI educational courses by 2030. The requirements are very clear. Primary school students will focus on experiencing AI, while high school students will develop skills that can be applied to AI projects. From robots to programming courses on AI, experts say a future-oriented education revolution is now unfolding in China. Look at this, for instance. This is a school in Chengdu, the capital city of southwest China's Sichuan province. Students at this school can be seen having conversations and interacting with an AI humanoid robot.
We can now see the future very clearly. For example, 10 or 20 years from now, just like these primary and high school students, they will definitely face the world of artificial intelligence after they start working. The future determines they must learn artificial intelligence from now on.
Courses like how to use AI programming to build small robots have become compulsory courses in some Chinese primary schools.
We are earnestly promoting the strategic action of digital education and carrying out a series of application scenarios such as moral education, teaching, sports, aesthetic, and scientific education enabled by AI.
And with China pushing for full AI integration, by 2030, one can't help but think what the future holds for AI in education.
Buenos días a todos. No hay motivo, razón ni justificación que soporte esta decisión que afectará a nuestros pueblos y naciones. Lo hemos dicho de diferentes formas. Cooperación y coordinación, sí. Subordinación Intervencionismo, no. En estos 5 meses de gobierno hemos decidido responder con medidas arancelarias y no arancelarias que anunciaré en plaza pública el próximo domingo de 2025. Pero es inconcebible que no se piense en el daño que se va a causar tanto a ciudadanos y empresas de los Estados Unidos por el incremento en los precios de los artículos que se producen en nuestro país, como también el daño que se va a provocar por detener la creación de empleos en ambos países. Nadie gana con esta decisión.
The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, is now calling last Friday's showdown with Trump regrettable and says Ukraine is ready to work on peace deal. Zelensky also added that Ukraine is grateful for U.S. military aid. In a lengthy tweet, the Ukrainian president said that last Friday's fiery meeting with President Donald Trump was regrettable and says it did not go as it was supposed to. Washington is understood to have privately said to be pushing for a public apology from the Ukrainian president. Zelensky further asserted that Ukraine is ready to work under President Donald Trump's strong leadership to negotiate a peace deal and ready to sign a minerals deal. Zelensky further said Kiev would work under, quote, Trump's strong leadership for peace. Zelensky said Ukraine sees agreement as a step towards solid security guarantees. This comes after the U.S. announced it would pause military aid to Ukraine. Zelensky reiterated his country's commitment to work fast to end the war. He claims that the first stages could be the release of prisoners and truce in the sky, ban on missiles, long-range drones, bombs on energy and other civilian infrastructure, and truce in the sea immediately. He added that if Russia does this, his country will want to move very fast through all the next stages and to work with the U.S. to agree on a strong final deal.
Ми прагнемо конструктивної співпраці, партнерських відносин. Про те, що відбулось у Білому домі замість наших перемовин, можна тільки шкодувати. Але треба знаходити силу, йти далі, поважати одне одного, як ми завжди поважаємо Америку, Європу, всіх партнерів і разом робити все, щоб наблизити мир. Сьогодні у багатьох одне питання – що буде далі з допомогою від Америки? Я доручив міністру оборони України, керівникам наших розвідок, дипломатам зв'язатись зі своїми відповідниками в Сполучених Штатах Америки і отримати офіційну інформацію. Люди не повинні здогадуватись. Україна і Америка заслуговують на поважний діалог, на чітку позицію одне одного. Тим більше, коли йдеться про захист життів у час повномасштабної війни. Зараз не 22-й рік, зараз наша стійкість вища, ми маємо засоби захисту, але для нас важливі нормальні партнерські відносини з Америкою для реального закінчення війни. Ніхто з нас не хоче нескінченної війни.
The United States launched a trade war against Canada. Their closest partner and ally, their closest friend. At the same time, they're talking about working positively with Russia, appeasing Vladimir Putin, a lying, murderous dictator. Make that make sense. Canadians are reasonable, and we are polite, but we will not back down from a fight. Not when our country and the well-being of everyone in it is at stake. Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do. We two friends fighting is exactly what our opponents around the world want to see. I think in terms of what he wants, I heard he talked about banking again this morning in a tweet, which doesn't make any sense because American banks, there's about 16 American banks currently active in Canada holding about $113 billion worth of assets in this country. So the American banks are alive and well and prospering in Canada. It's an example of not really being able to see what it is that he wants, because even the excuse that he's giving for these Paris tariffs today of fentanyl is completely bogus, completely unjustified, completely false. So we actually have to fold back on the one thing he has said repeatedly, that what he wants is to see a total collapse of the Canadian economy, because that'll make it easier to annex us. Now, first of all, that's never going to happen. We will never be the 51st state. But yeah, he can do damage to the Canadian economy, and he's started this morning. But he is rapidly going to find out, as American families are going to find out, that that's going to hurt people on both sides of the border.
Shifting focus now to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where M23 rebels abducted at least 130 sick and injured men from 2 hospitals in the city of Goma last week. As per the United Nations, on February 28, the fighters raided 2 hospitals and took 116 patients from one and 15 patients from the other. What's more, the abducted men were suspected of being DRC soldiers or members of a pro-government militia. Meanwhile, families in eastern Congo laid to rest victims of a deadly bombing that killed at least 13 people in Bukavu, as grieving relatives pleaded with the government to ensure peace and security. At the end of January of this year, the Tutsi-led M23 marched into the city of Goma and have since made advances into East Congo, during which they seized territory and gained access to valuable minerals. Their advance, which started in late December, is the gravest escalation in a long-running conflict that has gripped the country. Since January, as per the government, about 7,000 people have been killed in East Congo, and almost 500,000 were left without shelter after 90 displacement camps were destroyed in the fighting which shows no signs of abating. However, the UN, in its statement, urged the M23 rebels to respect international humanitarian law, protecting the sick and the injured in the course of war. Meanwhile, victims of deadly bombing that killed at least 13 people in Bukavu, one of the key cities captured by the rebels back in February, were laid to rest, and families mourned over the loss of lives of the loved ones whose photographs were placed in front of the caskets.
We have lost a family member, my older brother named Bruno. He left the house to visit his younger brother in the Kadutu commune. He was given access, but after entering the place where the meeting was held, the exit was prohibited. That's how he died from the explosion of these bombs at the Independence Square.
The families also pleaded with the government to help them in times of distress. However, no group has claimed responsibility for the attack as of now. The details of the attack are heart-wrenching. Reportedly, the city's general hospital was treating 68 people for injuries, and Congo's Interior Ministry has said nearly 100 had been seriously injured, while 11 people died on the spot. Others succumbed to their injuries in the hospital. Last week, the UK government added to calls for the rebel group to be part of an inclusive dialogue to help find a political solution to the conflict. However, despite growing international pressure, the Democratic Republic of Congo remains resolute in its decision not to have direct talks with the M23 rebel group. So what happens next? After all, the stakes keep getting higher.
The United Nations has released a horrific report on the war-torn country of Sudan. United Nations Agency for Children says minors as young as a year old are raped since the beginning of this war. The agency has warned that sexual violence is being used as a tactic of war. UNICEF says 221 children, including boys, are raped by armed men in the North African nation. The war between the military and its rival Rapid Support Forces broke out in April 2023. So far, the war has driven more than 14 million people from their homes and pushed parts of the country into famine. Rights groups say that atrocities, including sexual violence and forced child marriages, have been committed by both sides. Over 60,000 children have been internally displaced, and many have been subjected to sexual violence in these conflict zones. UNICEF says over 30% of the child rape victims are boys. The victims include 16 children under the age of 5 and 4 infants. The cases were reported in the states of Gedaref, Kassala, Gezira, Khartoum, Northern State, South Kordofan, and Darfur. Gezira is also known as Jazeera. The United Nations Child Agency says of the 221 children raped, 73 cases were conflict-related and 71 were not, while the others were unidentified. Survivors are often reluctant to report that they were subject to sexual violence due to social stigma and fear of retribution from armed groups and rejection from their families.
I met with girls who told me that they had attempted to commit suicide. I met with girls who had been diagnosed with depression, with anxiety, with post-traumatic stress disorder by professionals in Sudan. And one of them had even had seizures that had been linked to that post-traumatic stress. Her body was in shock by what had happened to her.
There is no relief for survivors either who are subjected to brutality. More than 70% of hospitals in conflict-affected areas are currently non-operational due to damage, destruction, a lack of supplies, or being used as shelters or for other purposes.